All right, so today we're going to continue the conversation around societies. We started with kind of talking about as humans go forward and we master our environment, we then start to be able to master the world surrounding us and create civilization societies, move away from having to always be located by water, right? As we master technology, we control the environment and it doesn't control us. The benefits and the shifts in the oscillations that have changed from the hunter and gatherer, the pre-industrial age, right? Or looking back at the idea of when we used to have to forage for food to the post-industrial era, which we're in now, when we look at the idea of services being sold and how that becomes the new currency, how knowledge has become quintessential, and labor, we still sell labor, but a lot of us is more about selling our labor as a service, right? Think about Airbnb, our home, it's a resource, we can use it now. Uber, your personal driving device, now you can use that for monetization and multiple incomes. The change in how we did this, just going to factories when we were in the industrial age, hunter and gatherer, moving as the times move, right? If all the animals perish or we've hunted them all, we had to move. If the water ran out, we had to move. Now we're able to manufacture these things. It's come with pros, it's come with cons. And we're going to discuss a little bit of that in this lecture about some of the benefits that have happened and some of the negatives that have happened, and some of the ways that we're pushing forward as a society as we're mastering the environment. So let me get into these slides and we'll kind of go through this part two of this society's conversation within this Social 101 class. So bear with me one moment and I will get this up for you. All right, so the slides are here. Let me get that full screen for you. Perfect. So first, let's admire my awesome moving screen. So cool, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, continuing down this conversation, let's talk about the social construction of reality. So I've said this a few times in the lectures, and it's true. The reality is this: we are in a society, and society is greater than the sum of its parts, like I talked about that quote from Emil Durkheim, one of our founding fathers here in sociology. And as it be known, the reality is society is not only bigger than us, it will continue after us, but it is created by us. It is greater than the sum of its parts. And everything within our world around us is absolutely a social construction of reality. We have the rules that we have the material cultures that we have the engagements that we have, currencies, capitalism, all of this is constructed by us. And many times the problems that we face on a day-to-day basis, ironically, are through the institutionalizations of societal constructs that we have had. There is no absolute truth throughout society. If we one day decided that all of us would walk around back on all fours and we normalize this through processes and socialization, it might be the case. That's a big thing there. We've talked about socialization a bit, but how much we're socialized through our cultural values and our connections plays into our understanding of what society is. Now I have this little video for you here from TikTok. I'm gonna play a little bit of it like I have been in the past. If you wanna watch the whole thing on your own, remember, these slides are posted.
That we, as individuals, are always participating in something larger than ourselves is the core concept underpinning the field of sociology. Those larger things that we're all participating in are referred to as social systems. Social systems are interconnected arrangements, structures, and relationships that combine to form a coherent whole. As individual members of society, we are all always participating in a range of different social systems. So, for example, the family unit is a social system, as are schools, and police departments, and corporations,
Social control.
and whole societies. Patriarchy and white supremacy are also examples of complex, interlocking social systems. It's the dynamic relationship between us as individuals and these larger social systems that makes social life happen.
That's important. So yeah, as they mentioned in this video, right, it's the systems and the structures around us. Family units, police are social control, right, to enforce the norms and values. Family structures help build and socialize us and how we work every single day. These social systems that surround us are a social construction, and they maintain the regulation and the oscillation of rules as they change and become different. We'll cover more of this when we cover deviance and social control, but the society that we've established will live past us. It's bigger than the sum of its parts because we've built fail-safes. We've built ways that it is enforced. We have made this so habitual that you don't even realize it's happening around you a lot of the times because it's so constructed in our everyday life. And perfect timing. I mentioned the idea of habitualization or habits, and we do this all the time, right? Think about all the ways that we wake up. we get a coffee. Maybe you're a coffee person. Me, I'm personally a Monster person. I get Monster. You can't see it because of the green screen, but I drink Monster every day. There's a pattern around it. And we build some of these to an unhealthy degree, also to a healthy degree. And the reality is when you do something over and over again, it puts it into what I refer to in this class all the time is autopilot, right? Thinking of factories and how the mundane pattern of the work causes alienation, which I just mentioned earlier with Karl Marx. But this is the idea of the habitualization and the consistent socialization of constructing our day-to-day lives so that we see it as routinized routines, right? The way we do it becomes so second nature that we don't even think about it, right? Hopefully you don't see my face covering this, but famously, the term for insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I'm formerly from the marketing and sales world, which literally is doing the same thing and hoping for different results. So I used to always make jokes that we're defining insanity every single day. But yeah, it's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and over again. Well, we do that all the time, every single day. The more we do it, we get better at it. The more that we get better at it, the more it becomes second nature. And when we don't think about these things, it builds into our expectations. And when those expectations match reality or what we think of reality, we don't question it. We just move forward. So like it says on the slide, think of factories, how the mundane routinized patterns workers do day in and day out, the same process. You get so good at it, you don't even think about it. Think about when they say, oh, I don't know how to do this. Like when you start a job, if you've worked in retail, oh, it'll be second nature before you know it. That's because it's socialized into you through habitualization. Big word that just means habits, the first part, right? Well, here's another quote for you, right? Some Team Fortress TF2, right? Well, that didn't work. My brain will try doing the exact same thing. Our brain justifies it all the time. But let's talk about this a little further, right? So social constructionism, or building the construction around our reality and what our reality is a really interesting dynamic. So institutionalization, when we take that word away from there, comes down to it at a societal level, a habit in society. We're institutionalized into places such as schools can institutionalize you. You can also have prisons use institutionalization to enforce degradation ceremonies, to enforce collective behavior and control. But I have a little experiment that I usually do in class here, and you're feel free to look which one is which, right? But which one of these is a school, which one is a prison? This ties back to when we had the conversation, I keep telling you this is going to keep coming up, of material versus non-material culture. A building is a material culture. My wife is an interior architect, meaning she does the interiors of buildings. She goes and repurposes, reimagines, and designs, right? So when you're looking at these two images, they both are just buildings, but we established the material culture behind it, right? If you were on campus and we were in Neeb Hall or we were in Armstrong, social sciences, etc., especially things like Murdoch, you could use those as movie theaters, right? But they hold an institutional purpose because they've been institutionalized as academic places of learning. Therefore, when you come in and say you were in my class like usual, and I have 400 of you looking up at me, we just assume that it is an education platform. I mean, I could be some random Joe Schmo standing up there telling you about why my day's good, but you expect me to come lecture. You're clicking on these lectures assuming it's going to be academic. I could just be sitting here twiddling my finger around like this because it's the process of habitualization. You go in with expectations, and as Goffman talks about, you have a managed and an expected impression that you're wanting to do, an interaction. So do buildings hold purposes? Absolutely. Are they stagnant and absolute? No, they change all the time. We repurpose things all the time. On your way to Cave Creek in Scottsdale, there is what used to be a electronic Fry's grocery store, and now it is a Honor Health. Repurpose, change the material culture to match non-material needs, right? So you change the building to now have a non-material culture, meaning it has new meaning behind it. For a point of reference, which one of these is a school? This one, it's New Trier High School. This is the prison. Right? If you're interested to know, the guy who designed New Trier High School, it's from in Chicago, made prisons first. So it's a reason it kind of looks very prison-y, right? But it's interesting if you really think about which one's a prison, which one's a school, right? What makes a school? Non-material culture. Now, this is what's really important here, and I want you to take this one, and I honestly think you should probably maybe talk about this on Yellow Dig, because it's hard for some students to conceptually grasp this, but it's very fascinating. So there's a theorem called Thomas theorem. It's on your slide in front of you. Essentially, if we define a situation as real, they are real in their consequences. Essentially, your subjective view is your reality. If you decide that something is real, if you decide that something is what you see, regardless of the truth behind it, your subjective understanding makes it true. There was a viral video on TikTok that went around where a Honda Civic, I think it was, crashed into a Ferrari. Not a good thing, right? A lot of money insurance. Well, the one video that was released made it look like the Civic just blew through that Ferrari and that they were at fault. Later, another video was posted where it shows that the Ferrari had edged through and actually hit her first. But The subjective reality of when I saw that video, or when anyone else saw that video, if you've seen it too, is that it was the Honda's fault, because the perspective you saw created a definition, and the consequences were real, both in your understanding and the circumstances. In the book, and many times in examples that are given, if a police saw two identical Ford Tauruses going down the road, and then there was a turn, and one of them, you blew a stop sign and you're in one of the Ford Tauruses, and the other person turns quickly and goes right, and you both blew that stop sign, right? Or at least that's what it looked like. The cop doesn't know that there's two. Let's say he didn't see the second one, and you were driving side by side, but he did see someone in a Civic pull by a Taurus and blow the stop sign. The other Civic or Taurus turns right, is off the road, but the policeman saw an infraction. So in his mind, his subjective view, he's going to issue a ticket. You may not have been the car that did the objectionable act, but one that looked just like it and you couldn't confirm otherwise did. So without seeing the actual driver, all they know is the vehicle. So the situation is defined as real, and in their consequences, a ticket will be issued. So it's the interpretation of a situation causes the action. If you see something subjectively and understand it, it's real to you, both in the consequences and the realities of it. It's not an objective-based situation. It's why a lot of time hearsay is used on court cases when you try to have someone have an eyewitness example, because you may not understand all of the different dynamics of it, the angles of understanding. So your subjective view in the Thomas theorem is based upon your observation, your subjective reality, both in their consequences and their understanding. It's very complicated sometimes to explain it. Hopefully I've done a good job. Talk about it on Yellow Dig, talk about what it means if something is subjectively real to you, both in consequences and reality, but you don't have objective facts. Labelings have a large impact on who becomes what and who is what and what we become. Merton talks about this in his self-fulfilling prophecy. If someone tells you you're stupid your whole life, why are you going to try to be anything different, right? So if labels can actually play a huge role. If someone tells you you're a superstar and you're real special and you get a lot of cookies, you may try harder than someone who's been told that they're the class clown or they're stupid. Think back into the time of when you were in high school, and if someone labeled you goth, if someone labeled you an emo, someone labeled you popular, someone labeled you uncool or nerdy, how much did that help identify who you were? Goffman famously says, be careful of the masks you wear, because the one and the impression that you manage may eventually become not a mask, but become your face. So, how we are labeled and defines very much so towards who we are. It's why labels can be so dangerous. Case in point, right? When they called the COVID virus the China virus, the Wuhan strain, right? That caused a lot of problems, both in Thomas theorem, people started defining it as China's fault and started doing Asian violence, right? So the labels we play with are dangerous. I usually ask in class, and feel free to answer this in Yellow Dig, can any of you tell me how Spanish flu got its name? I'm just going to leave that blank. Great thing for Yellow Dig, have the conversation. I'll answer on Yellow Dig if anyone wants to post this as a quick post, right? Look it up. Why is it called the Spanish flu? Is it because it was in Spain? Is it because Spanish people had it first? But why do we know it is that? And does that cause a negative association behind Spanish individuals, Spanish flu? Because Wuhan virus, or the China virus, caused Asian hate. So labels play a large role in our consequential and circumstances in our life. So let's talk a little bit about social construction, right? I've been saying Merton's name a lot. Well, he has what's called the self-fulfilling prophecy, which I just kind of talked about. It's if you believe a certain idea, even if it's false, it may become true to you. If someone tells you you're a superstar from birth, you might become the superstar. Someone tells you that you're a class clown, you might be a class clown, right? Our actions, others' beliefs, our actions, others' beliefs, our actions. It's a repetitive circle. It can be vicious, it can be beneficial. A false definition of a situation invoking a new behavior, which makes the original false conception come true, right? Merton's self-fulfilling prophecy in your book, I believe, is explained by the idea of a bank run. It's most commonly done that way, right? If someone told you that the bank was going to run out of money, you think they're crazy, bonkers, real cuckoos, right? But what if the bank does run out of money? And say that someone heard that they believed it, they went and they started pulling out money. People started observing this. It's called moral panic. And so everyone started pulling out money. Well, banks only have a certain amount of capital inside each location. So let's say that enough people pulled out their funds because they had heard this rumor. Well, now the bank has run out of money. Now you remember that woman said the bank was going to run out of money. That woman, man, or them or they, right? And now it's become true. Now that person's prophetic. If you're a fan of Nostradamus, he had 10,000 theories in regards to the idea of how the world was going to end on a regular basis. The expression, if you throw something at the wall, eventually it sticks. It's kind of the idea. But what happens when it becomes true, right? If someone tells you there's going to be a car crash on I-90 today, well, it's likely that will happen. But what happens when you watch the news and it does happen, right? And then you're like, oh, Dave said that, right? So sometimes when you hear that, it becomes this impact that really changes your perspective on things, right? The great toilet paper shortage of 2020 is a great example. Everyone said it was overselling, moral panic established through that by claims makers talking about it. And then they did run out of toilet paper. And then we saw the chaos that instilled from that, right? Unequal treatments of groups, criminality. This can be an example of people telling people that people like you are going to end up like this. Someone like you won't be going this far, ends up building a label and a presentation of self. It becomes Thomas theorem too. The subjective nature that they've been told becomes true both in the consequences and reality. The Oedipus effect, right? If you aren't familiar with the rumor around Oedipus, right? There was a legend that he was going to become king or something like this, right? And so the mother and the father had the son put into a different village, was raised differently, eventually on a trading route, ran into a man, got into a confrontation with the man, fought with the man. The man ended up being his biological father, killed his man, thus becoming the king of the Greek in that sense, marrying his mother and having children, which was fulfilling the prophecy. The reality was they tried to counter the prophecy. That was a horrible telling of it, I'm sorry. But the reality was, even though you tried to push against it, sometimes it came true because the kid didn't know who the king, his parents were. And so it was a confrontation that led to the prophecy being fulfilled. Thus, it would be seen as a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this can break down, like I said, into positive cycles, vicious cycles, right? If someone comes from a poor socioeconomic status, the amount of society pushing back against them may create a vicious cycle of continual poverty. Look at the systemic inequalities of income inequality, right, in this country. That's a very self-fulfilling prophecy. If there aren't jobs and jobs aren't willing to take a chance on you, how are you going to move up? The favorite joke there is, try to work in retail. A lot of times people in retail will tell you need to have 5 years of retail experience, and you're just starting, so you don't even have 5 years of experience, but you have to get 5 years of experience to be able to work inside that field. So it kind of becomes a vicious cycle. You got to hope someone takes a shot on you. You want to get into management, like, well, you need 5 years of management training. Well, how are you going to get that if no one's going to hire you? Because the bare minimum requirement is 5 years of management training. Or when they're saying that you need 3 times your average rent to be able to pay for rent, well, let's say that breaks down to 65,000. The median income's around 50, right? So it's like, how's that going to work out? So you start looking at these cycles, but positive cycles happen too, right? And many times there's a lot to do with socioeconomic status, conflict theory. A lot of times what you'll see is that if someone is being told they're a star athlete, they become a star athlete. If you see someone getting financial advice, such as Roth IRAs and knowing how to invest ETFs, Vanguards and whatnot, right, and knowing how to take IDX stocks, this builds a cycle of wealth. And many times that's why you see a lot of wealth that just keeps traveling generation to generation, because of this positive cycle of this self-fulfilling prophecy. You grew up with this, you're going to have this anticipatory socialization, as we've talked about. So what would be the social construction in the interactionalist view? Well, when looking through the paradigm of interactionalism, as we've talked about, it's micro. That means interactions day to day. You enter a world of how symbols can have various meanings in different situations. Can a situation be perceived differently? Absolutely, it can, right? So wearing a mask at the start of the pandemic versus how people will feel when masks are not required, having a mask on or having a mask off, refusing to put it on, became a stance of opposition or connection, right? It became a way to be able to define yourself. On one slight different change in normal can alter a situation entirely, right? For example, famously, George W. Bush went like this when he was in Australia. If you can see my thumb, that means F you in Australia. I've said this a few times, but essentially what you're looking at is that a symbol from a social construction can be completely different. One slight change can have a whole different connotation of how it matters, right? Norms always start somewhere, and when some new trend is established, that challenged at first, this is the idea of cultural lag, and then eventually acceptance, innovation, and then many people will start adapting as normal fashion. It cycles through popularity. Right now, a lot of the millennial fashion is going through. Before that was the 90s. You start seeing generational change as towards how these symbols have significance to them. The same norm accepted then may not be later, right? So we're seeing a lot of this now with a lot of the unfortunate rights being taken away, but the symbols and the ideas of freedom or social change can be adjusted based on symbols. Great examples, the swastika, originally a Hindu symbol, did not mean anything negative, meant peace, but then Hitler liked its design and the meaning, flipped it over. And now if you see anyone with a swastika, you're not thinking that they're a fan of Hindu culture, you're thinking they're a Nazi, and that symbol means that they're racist and that they have views on eugenics, right? You can see this everywhere with this construction of how symbols change through society, and when they change, you have to be aware of them. The video on the last deck talked about that Doc Martens don't have red laces, and that means fascism behind them a lot of times. So be careful on how you wear things. You look at a cultural appropriation, right? Look at all the different ways this happens. So how symbols can change can have a vastly impact on how people view you. It just does. So if roles change, symbols change, and values and norms are changed, what are some different outcomes that can happen? It's a good question, right? If roles change, symbols change, and values and norms are changed, what are some of the different outcomes that can happen? I repeat this because I think that'd be a great conversation to have on Yellowdick. Anyone in this classroom who is from a different country, a different part of the United States. I'm from Chicago. We're in Arizona. I've seen things change here in perception of how I understand them, right? Especially for any international students, tell me some of the weird things you run into, culture shocks, but also symbols that don't have the same meaning, ways that engaging with one another don't have the same meaning. I'd love for this to be a conversation on Yellowdick. It'd be a really easy way to kind of enter that conversation and have that conversation, and also kind of fun to hear you guys' perspectives. Hope you share. This is a great video sent by a student. I'm not going to play it here, but I really highly recommend you watch. It's really showing the powerful dynamics of cultural representation and revitalized history. Things that were hated then become norm, they become norm, and then you watch them and everyone wants to do them. You try to change it, people fight against it, lagging, innovation. It's a really good video. It was actually a video that was sent to me by a student, and I think it's really interesting. It's about 10 minutes long, maybe. Give it a watch. So let's look at, this is an important part of the lecture. And let's take a look at it. So what we're looking at are what are called statuses and roles. And we have these in our lives and they intersect on a regular basis. Basically a status or status, depending how you want to say it, is a social position. And it's ascribed to you, meaning it's given to you many of the time. Statuses, you have the idea that status is very given, we don't have control over, they're assigned or they're involuntary. This little kind of slide here, I like it. It's like achieved statuses, ones that we want and we choose voluntarily. College graduate would be achieved status. Ascribed would be you're born into it, you're put upon it, right? Being a son or daughter is an ascribed status. You don't really have a choice. It's something that was given to you, right? Your socioeconomic status on birth, given to you. Becoming rich in your lifetime, achieved. You decided to work hard and get there, if possible, right? We'll talk about that during social stratification. But essentially, ascribes are put upon you. Think about how you're ascribed a new degree or ascribed a new role. If you play video games, that's very easy to kind of connect. Achieved is ones that we want. High school graduate, college degree, employee, wife, husband, right? You've achieved a status change. And then master status. This is a big one. This is the one that people see you as. More commonly, this ties to race, this ties to gender, this ties to things that people can see immediately and they use to dictate how they view you, right? So the one that stands out the most depends on their situation, the context. You can have a master status that you feel is the most important, but race is one of the biggest ones. It's something that is immediately used to define you. I usually use in my deviance class an example where I write this really big, or I have this really big bio of an individual who's a doctor. And at the end, it mentions that they're African-American. And then most people will say the Black doctor, because it just becomes how we identify and categorize people. People will tend to view someone by their gender immediately, or by their socioeconomic status, or their job here in the United States. It's a big one. One of the first questions people ask you is, what do you do for a living? And then that's like, oh yeah, John, he's a professor, right? Yeah, so like it goes down that path, right? My brother is a analyst right now, and it's whenever he's unemployed, you'll find that people have a hard time defining their master status because we introduce ourselves in the United States by our career. So it's something that identifies you. It's the master status. I don't like the name master. I know we've changed it now due to the connection to negativity, right? So this is the major status. This is the identifying status if you don't like the term master. But it's the one that rules them all, right? It's the one that establishes who you are. Statuses and roles, great conversation to have on Yellowdick. What are some of your statuses here? Share with the class, right? So now we're going to talk about roles. Role behavior, the behavior and expectation associated with status. So status is the position that you're within, role is the duties that you have. We occupy a status, we play a role. We occupy a status, we play a role. That's important to remember. Strain, this is important, so this is on your quiz, is when there are competing roles within the same status. If you're a student and you have different classes, right? There are different roles. In my class, you have to finish this course. In another class, you have to finish the work there. If you don't finish my work because you have two different tests on the same day from different courses, this would be a role strain. It's something, a problem within the same role. You're battling in the same sense. If you're a student and a student athlete, this could be a great example. I would advise you talk about this on Yellowdick so you have an understanding, because a lot of students get this question wrong about roles and statuses. Role conflict, this is when there are competing roles between two or more statuses. That's the important point there. Strains between one, conflicts between two. So if it's between one, it's still strain. If it's conflict, it's two. So if I am a professor and I am a husband and both have a competing thing, my wife has something she's doing today and I have a lecture to do, That's a role conflict because I have two different roles that have responsibilities that are intersecting and causing a bridge, causing me to have anxiety and have complications. If it's that I'm a professor and I have two different papers to grade on the same day, and they're from different courses I'm teaching, that's a role strain because I'm still having a conflict, but it's between my roles as my individual role as a professor. I really do advise you guys write about this in Yellow Dig. I think you'll find it interesting to talk about the roles and the statuses you hold and what's the difference between a strain and a conflict. So statuses and roles again, role strain, we can be so many things, but at what cost to others? If you're a student juggling all your responsibilities of class and student life, you feel strained, there you go. You can be a parent trying to balance and also working a full-time job. This would be a conflict because you have two different statuses, employee and parent. We hold so many different statuses and roles that conflict, and this is called the intersections. Crenshaw has a really good video on this if you want to look it up, but they all can intersect and they can all play into our understanding of life. Please share some roles that you have, some statuses you have, right? The different hats you wear. I hope you share some and talk about it on Yellow Day. But what is the self? So we've talked a little bit about this sense of Cooley, right? And we're going to continue on this because it ties to the social construction of reality around it. It's a process where we construct a sense of who we are based on the interactions according to Cooley. Cooley did believe that there was a social construction, but there's a mirror. I see myself as this, but everyone sees me as that, right? We talked about this. But essentially you need to break it down into a reality of this and look at ourselves. It's broken down in 3 steps. Imagine what others think of us, interpret their reactions, come up with ourselves based on what we conclude based our own and others' perceptions. Mead didn't believe there was a self. He believed it was all a social construction. But yeah, these are the looking glass selves. Find some and post it in Yellow Dig. You can use memes, you can use videos. Who are you? Who do your friends think you are? Who does your mom think you are? Who does your uncle think you are? Who does your brother think you are? If you have one, sister, if you have one, versus what does it really matter, right? We have sociology student versus sociology student here and then professor. But Cooley's looking glass self is actually a very fun thing. It actually was a meme for quite a while too, because it's something you can build on. Goffman believed that self is also built around the idea of dramaturgical approach or dramaturgy. Essentially, we perform acts to manage the roles and expectations, front stage, backstage. I referenced this earlier, but we perform the acts to manage the impressions of others. If we go to a sports game, many times you're going to wear outfits like a jersey or shorts. You're going to probably try to make references to the sports and how it's played, maybe make a bunch of references that you played it in middle school, right? Front stage is when we're facing people and we're acting because we know people are watching. Backstage is when we are behind the stage. Like think about when you're in a car, that's an interesting dividing line. We are backstage, but people see us. That's why it's funny to people watch, see people pick their nose and whatnot, right? But backstage, we're able to relax. There's a really big conversation right now with the idea of how the world's changed with social media. Are we ever even backstage anymore? With people listening in, the idea of panopticism, with the idea of engagement, phone calls, FaceTimes, inability to kind of be away from the world while we're on social media. Front stage is very much more so every day now, and it's always on. It's kind of crazy. It's why a lot of people like to disconnect, go do a trip where you're not communicating with others and you're by yourself. Unplug, as they say, and this is when you be on backstage. Expressions given, intention of our intention, controlled speech, gestures, and props. So we have items and physical objects, material culture that helps us to be able to establish our role. If I was a doctor, wearing a white robe would help. Wearing a white coat would make you think I'm a doctor. Coming in a Hawaiian shirt might not be the best move. Even this outfit, like I made a joke yesterday when I was recording the other one, or whenever that was that I recorded it, right? That my shirt wasn't very professorial, right? I should be wearing a button up or something to do this lecture. But what you have, the idea is that there are props used to be able to maintain that expression, and expressions given off, unintentional cues, less controlled, may not be congruent with what we're trying to pull off, right? I'm doing this lecture, I'm talking sociology. Maybe I don't exude professor with what I'm wearing, how I'm speaking, my mannerisms. So it's not controlled by me. I don't really have, they're unintentional, but they let you know something. And when we mess up, we must correct, may lead to embarrassment. We know when we don't do something right. It's just true. And then that tends to be where we correct and give off the expression that we want to give off on the expression. Short little video for you here.
If you act differently with one group of friends compared to another, are you being fake? The idea of dramaturgy suggests that no, you aren't. You're just an actor in different masks, switching between roles to help you better connect with different audiences. Each mask is valid and necessary and part of the complex whole that is you.
Let me reiterate something I've said before. It's just true. We all wear masks all the time. We're not being fake. But Goffman also famously says that be careful about this. When you manage your impression and you manage it wrongly, the mask that you're wearing may become your face. It may be the representation. I always say in this course that your 5 friends that you have are very important towards figuring out who you are as a person. So I talk a lot of sociology in here. I'd love to hear some thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Cooley, Goffman, impression management. The floor is open. We're not in person, so we're not going to be able to talk, but use Yellow Dig. Let's talk about it, right? I spend a lot of time wearing the mask of instructor. I'm also a husband. I'm also a fur daddy in the sense that I have 2 pets. I have a dog and a cat. I have a family, right? So I'm a son. I have friends, so I play that role. There's so many different roles we intersect with day-to-day basis, right? So make sure to stay on top of your work assignments in Yellow Dig. Make sure you're posting on a regular basis on Yellow Dig. Make sure that you're doing everything you can. I appreciate you all in this class. I look forward to being able to engage with you on Yellow Dig when we start having these conversations. Yeah, and I will see you in the next lecture. Peace.